that may be a very good entry point. Megan.
Yeah, I agree. We actually have a similar question from Dania, who just wrote that someone told me it's quite useless to apply for online if you don't have any contacts at the foundation. So I think that's really related to the comments you were just saying about using LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's important. I think if you can create contact, and that networking is important for that reason, because it's and it's not completely unfair, because let's imagine your NGO is hiring somebody and there are two good candidates, one you've never heard of before and the other one that you know very well and like. Then your chances of hiring the person that you know and like are greater if they're both capable people. Because you have to work with that person, you have to build a relationship with them, you have to trust them, etc. So somebody you know will already be a bit easier. The decision will often sway to the person that you know. And with funders it's the same. There are people sitting there. They are real people, reading real proposals, etc. If you've already had a contact with them, if they've spoken to you beforehand, then the chances of success are greater. Now, I have to caution you, though, because there are quite a few exceptions. And when you get on Funds for NGOs, the announcement, the funding announcements, and it says you can apply for USAID funding, or the latest one, I think, was UN Democracy Fund. Mm-hmm. The UN Democracy Fund gets 3,000 to 4,000 applications each round, and it may be going up, actually. So your chances of networking with them are not that good. But still, I would try. What you can always do if you apply for a request or call for proposals, even if there are thousands of applicants, you can always email the funder, the donor, and ask some technical questions like about the deadline or the requirements or whether your country or team is eligible, etc. Just so you create that relationship. It can sometimes help. But there are, you know, I've applied for funding. I've applied for thousands of grants over my career, and I've been successful in getting funding when people didn't know me at all, or my NGO. So it is possible to do that also.
Yeah, Eric. And then last question in this section, we received quite a few questions from participants on corporate, foundation, government donors. We see some examples here from Patricia. How do you approach companies to get funding? Also, we have a question from Eunice, who wants to know about raising funds from foreign embassies. So if you want to talk about that as well. And then maybe we can also include a question here from Tom that's kind of related, who wanted to know if you had any advice for registered organizations that aren't registered in the country that they're applying for funds in.
Well, let me start with Tom's question. If you're not registered in the country where you are applying for funds for, so let's say you're working in India and you want to apply for funding in Germany. In general, individuals, in almost everywhere in the world, if an individual or a company gives funding, it needs to be to a non-profit or NGO in their own country that has tax-exempt status for them to get a tax exemption, a tax write-off. So that's quite typical. For example, if I'm an individual sitting in New York and I give $100 to an NGO in Kenya that's not registered in the United States, I can't use that as a tax deduction, a tax write-off. So that's an issue. But foundations, government agencies, corporate foundations, they can give almost always to any registered NGO anywhere in the world without problem. The only issue might be their own eligibility requirements. If I'm a foundation based in London and I typically provide all my funding to NGOs in London and my eligibility requirement says I only fund projects in London, then applying from Kenya or India or another country or outside of London doesn't really make a lot of sense. So you have to do the research to assess that. So in general, you do not need to be registered in the country where you're fundraising from. And I can tell you there are large NGOs in countries that get funding from 20 or 30 different donors from all different countries without a problem. So that's the basic answer to Tom's question. Then how do you fund from companies? That was a question that Patricia asked. Excuse me. How do you fund from companies? Now, companies are a bit different from embassies and foundations in my mind. They're more like individuals, because companies are often not in the business of philanthropy or non-profit. They're in the business of making money and selling products and services. So they may have a CSR, a corporate social responsibility component, or they may want to get their name out, or they want to show people that they're a good corporate citizen, something along those lines. So fundraising from companies often requires networking. It often requires outreach. You also have to show a company that what you do is something they can publicize in their annual report, on their website, etc. There are some exceptions, but not that many. But there are maybe some differences if you look at companies in your own location. Let's say you're an NGO in a developing country, you work in Kampala in Uganda, then you might be able to approach hotels for venue space. You might be able to approach a printing house to see if they can print stuff for you. Those are in-kind contributions that are often given by companies. Then embassies are important. Even if the funding comes from a foreign ministry or a development agency, it is critical to meet with foreign embassies, the embassy in the country where you work. And sometimes it's difficult, but very many embassies, they will meet with you. One technique that I've used is to invite them. Invite them to visit your project. Invite them for visits to the field, invite them to openings or workshops or conferences, things that you plan. Because if I'm sitting in an embassy all day long as a attaché or a consular officer or what have you, a development officer, then I might like to get out of the office sometimes, get in a Jeep and see the project, or go to a workshop and meet the people that are working in that field. So that's important. Once you make the connection, make sure you have a technical discussion with these people. Many embassies have small grants programs, and many embassies provide funding for smaller NGOs and big NGOs as well, of course. Contact them, ask them, network with them, see what the opportunity is.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And just to kind of go back quickly on the social media, we did have a comment from Goal Zero who did say that LinkedIn is definitely a great tool to read about bios for some of the people that you're meeting with to help with networking and relationship building. So if you're interested in social media, Funds for NGOs does do a webinar on that. I think we'll be offering it again in February, but you can see the website for more information. So finally, let's move on to the last section of our discussion today. How do I apply? So we'll do one last poll from everyone. Thanks everyone for your great participation so far. So this is just a quick yes or no question whether or not you've written a proposal. So have you been a part of a team that's written a proposal? Anything like that if you've worked on it at all. So just yes or no whether or not you've worked on a proposal. That was a really quick response from everyone, so let's close the poll and share the results. And we see overwhelmingly 89% of our participants today have experience writing proposals, with 11% no.
Well, that's great to know. I think so most of you have some proposal writing experience, and maybe you just need some tips and tricks from my experience and Megan's experience on how to improve it. Very important to note is that, of course, you want to make sure that you first discuss with the donor what it is they really want. And I think probably the 11% that mentioned in the poll that they've never developed a proposal, they will still have some experience because they may have been involved in program development or strategic planning or what have you. And your proposal basically is just a description of your program. Or part of your program. And typically, if you have a good strategic program plan, a plan for your organization, what you want to do, who you're going to target, what type of activities you will implement, then you already have an overall proposal, and you can take bits and pieces of that and adapt it for the purposes of an application. Now, I do have to tell you, I think proposals are not as important as some of the other fundraising techniques. Of course, they are important and they have to be of good quality in the end. But proposals in and of themselves will not get you funding under most circumstances. And a